Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT. I know a lot of people think this channel is a dictatorship, and it is, but that doesn't mean I'm above throwing a bone to the democratic process every so often. Every month, my patrons at the $15 level or above can submit a video idea to me, and then the entirety of my patronage will vote on what they want to see. This month they voted on this: a strong indictment of democracy. This is the world legacy story delivered in ASMR. Now, I've learned a little bit about doing ASMR since I did the Communist Manifesto last April Fools, and what I heard was that it's not only whispering, it's also like tapping and flicking. So I've got a copy of True King of All Calamities, and I figure it's no big deal if we beat this guy to shit. Okay. Without any further ado, let's get started. Card Lore, The World Legacy, November 23rd, 2020, by Neo Arcadia. And now, the story everyone's been waiting for, The World Legacy. Page 1. File number 1, the endlessly repeating tale of the rise and fall of a certain world. The boys and girl, who barely eked out an existence in a time of harshness and cruelty, followed the path of destiny across the world, and eventually became embroiled in a great battle that decided the fate of the entire planet. Let us introduce the tale of that distant star where people's dreams and desires mix, all circling around a key that was left behind by God. The creation myth passed down from the celestial forest. In days of long ago, there was a god who governed the movement of the heavens. That god used the dragons as its vassals to fulfill their duty of maintaining the heavens in a cycle of creation and destruction. However, the power of destruction grew each time it was used, and eventually, the balance of power between creation and destruction had collapsed. The power of destruction had become so great that if it was let loose, it would have certainly destroyed the very heavens it was created to protect. God decided it was impossible to govern the heavens by themselves. Using the power of creation, a cage was forged, made of countless layers of the earthen crust, and the power of destruction was sealed within. The power of destruction, having lost its way, burned up, transforming into the planet's core. Its energy blended together with the power of creation coursing throughout the land, and the energy that flowed forth to the surface of the earth, giving rise to life, small existences that repeat the cycle of life and death. God turned the last vestiges of their being into a key, entrusting it to the life that had sprouted across the earth and disappeared. Over the countless years to follow, the power of destruction sometimes manifested itself on the surface, but each time, those small lives stood side by side with the dragons. In time, the key came to be known as a sword, while the power of destruction came to be known as the Great Darkness, and their story was passed down as the gallant epic of the world hero. Starlight hero, raise your sword and gather the light. You must vanquish the Great Darkness. Ecosystem. This world was ruled by mechanical life forms, with the 7 mech-knights standing at the top. The insectoid mechstrosities known as crawlers were a prevalent scourge across the land, and life for people was a constant fight against their threat. A young man who lived in the celestial forest. Page 2. The World Chalice Legend of the Rise and Fall of the World. Part 1. Those guided by fate. The people who lived in the celestial forest. There was a hidden village of humans in the great verdant forest known as the Celestial Forest. This village, which worshipped the god of the stars, had a sacred staff used in their rites and customs that had been passed down through countless generations, creating a barrier that protected the village from threats with its power. The successor of the staff at that time was Ebe, who had an older brother, Ningirsu, and together the two of them spent time with their childhood friend, the young boy Oram, and the small dragon whelp, Imduk. The world heroes and their encounter with the World Chalice. Oram and Ningirsu, seeking a means to reduce the burden of upholding the barrier even a little, spent a day and night trying to beat back the crawlers. One day Ebe heard a strange and mysterious voice from deep within the forest. Together with her worried friends, Suddenly, the staff of Eve emitted a dazzling glow, the massive structure coming to life as if in response to it. A small fairy, Lee, appeared before the band, who were startled by the fact that the structure was emitting the same kind of light as the staff. Lee bore the duty of leading humanity, but she was thwarted by the Mechanites and sealed within the World Legacy, World Chalice. She then revealed to Eve and her friends that she had been waiting for those who possessed the qualities to become the world heroes who shall protect this world. Page 3. Seeking the other world legacies after receiving the power of the World Chalice. You children are the world heroes. Please help me gather the scattered lights of this world and save it from the great darkness. Wanting to protect humanity, they accepted the earnest wish of the fairy Lee, and thus the children of the Celestial Forest decided to leave their home. The power granted from the World Chalice by Lee allowed them to overpower the crawlers, which up to then they had barely managed to hold off. But there were 6 other world legacies scattered across the world with similar power. Upon hearing that, once gathered, the artifacts would grant them the power to defeat even the Mechanites. The villagers finally felt hope. The second world legacy. The party then traveled to the wetlands, where the next world legacy lay sleeping. What awaited them there, however, was a vast swarm of crawlers, along with the ex-crawlers that controlled them. The team divided their forces beneath a silent gaze of the World Legacy world armor, and they found themselves slowly being pushed into a corner. In the end, managed to silence a vast number of the insectoid monstrosities with the aid of the clever Lee. They managed to break through the horde of crawlers and reach the world armor, but... Page 4. And finally, the 7 Mechanites appeared. The party finally arrived at the world armor, having given their all and used their wits to their fullest. But then, the Mechanites, the rulers of the realm of machines, suddenly appeared, glowing in the 7 colors of the rainbow. As Oram and the others were stunned by this turn of events, things went from bad to worse. The Mechanites ensnared Eve in energy even the barrier abilities of her sacred staff didn't stand a chance against. Then they disappeared into thin air with her, leaving Oram and the others behind, stunned at what had happened. In search of Eve, they came to a place with 2 world legacies. After Eve and her sacred staff were abducted, Lee told the party it would be dangerous to try and collect the other world legacies by themselves. After a long journey and much searching, they arrived at the ruins of a long-lost civilization that the Mechanites had already made their stronghold. There, the world legacies known as the World Lance and the World Shield were already active. Eve had doubts as to the idea that the Mechanites were the embodiment of the Great Darkness, as they refused to harm her even after they kidnapped her and seized her sacred staff. But Oram and the others launched a surprise attack on the Mechanites. Oram and the other heroes launched a fierce ambush attack, throwing everything they had into the fray, but the Mechanites, angered and enraged, finally combined into one as Mechanite Spectrum Supreme. In the midst of this back-and-forth battle, where even one wrong move could have spelled defeat, Ningirsu noticed a chance and gave signal to Lee. It was the start of a solo operation Lee had proposed. Page 5. The operation proposed by Lee. Eve was relieved to see Lee, who managed to sneak into the ancient ruins by herself and causing the two to be reborn as Eblee. The Mechanites were aware that Lee had disappeared, but could not afford to deal with her due to being stuck in the midst of battle. The power of Eblee and the heir to the power of the staff. The final battle between the Mechanites, who viewed Ningirsu as the strongest threats, and Oram, who kept growing stronger, continued, but then a massive explosion occurred inside the ruins. A torrent of incredible power erupted from the world chalice greater than any seen before, and then in the next moment, she suddenly appeared. It was none other than Ebe, but the power that emanated from her, brimming with evil, was a telltale sign she was no longer Ebe. She smiled and told them she was Lee, and that this body now belonged to her. As well, Eblee released a wave of energy, forcibly canceling out the power of the world chalice she had granted to Oram and the others, and she tried to take their lives as well. However, in a twist of fate, the Mechanites chose to oppose her. The united form of the Mechanites was undone, as they found they could no longer endure the power of Eblee. Eblee extracted the cores from most of the Mechanites by force, and tried to seize the sacred staff sealed inside the core of Blue Sky. As the Mechanites knew, the sacred staff was actually the key that controlled the fate of the stars and the very planet itself. Blue Sky attempted to make Oram his heir in his darkest hour. Oram opened his heart to the Mechanite and inherited the power of the staff. Now, in his hands, the key transformed into a pair of swords. Oram inherited the power of the staff. Page 6. The rematch against Eblee. Even though he inherited the key, the power of Oram became a pair of swords, because it was an indirect succession granted to him by Mechanite Blue Sky, rather than by the one true heir, Ebe. When Eblee realized that Ebe, sleeping deep within her, had the right of succession, she rushed to activate the world lance before Oram, who could now use the power of the key. While Oram managed to tail her, he found himself struggling against the nightmares, mythical beasts created by Eblee. However, Ningirsu, aided by Imduk, managed to catch up with Oram and the monsters. Together they struggled to help Oram, as they had lost the power of the world chalice in their previous fight, and everyone rushed towards the world lance. But in the blink of an eye, Eblee managed to activate the world lance first, launching a terrifying and intense attack against the heroes. The mythical beasts born by Eblee's hand, the nightmares. Eblee used the cores of the Mechanites to create beasts from myth and legend, each inheriting the characteristics of its source Mechanite. Ningirsu rushed to the side of Oram as his friends struggled to hold them off, and managed to defeat a mermaid in a single deadly blow. He then made himself the target of the other nightmares, giving Oram a clear path ahead to chase after Eblee. Ebe's will to defy Lee, and a tragic conclusion. Eblee picked up one of the swords in order to finish off Oram, who had been injured by the power of the world lance, but the dragon whelp Imduk leapt in front of her out of nowhere. Before its endangered friend, Imduk manifested a portion of its power as God's vassal. Even though it was brief, it forced the spirit of Lee to show itself, paralyzing her. That led the spirit of Ebe to finally awaken from the dark depths of her own mind. Seeing the fallen Oram and the sword in her hand, Ebe realized what was going on and made a sudden decision, turning the tip of the sword toward her own body and impaling herself. The power of bonds and feelings, which is the strength of living things, can easily be turned into a weakness. As long as she was in the body of Ebe, Oram and the others, who had deep bonds with her, would not be able to turn their weapons on their friend. Faced with the haughty and arrogant Eblee, Oram grew stronger. The Mechanites stood their determination. Ningirsu fought bravely, then Imduk awakened a hidden power. Ultimately, the ambitions of Eblee were shattered by deadly irregularities caused by a series of small glitches stacking on top of one another. However, it was a nightmarish ending for Oram and his companions, the warriors of the world chalice. Page 7. The disaster that ended the golden age of the ancient civilization. The era in which life on the earth prospered and civilization became incredibly advanced. In days of long ago, far before Oram and his friends were ever born, millions of years had passed since the time of the creation myth, and humanity had reached the heights of their prosperity, a power great enough to reveal the meaning of life itself. The dragons and their mission to protect the world's resources from being exploited were no longer considered a mere myth. It was during this era the key was unearthed. At first, humanity was excited by the discovery of such a mythical relic, but they soon grew to fear the fact that they excavated the key, considering it to be a sign of the clash between the world hero and the great darkness that actually happened, and decided to analyze the key. The scientist, Lee, made a name for herself across the world as the leading authority of computer science. Her participation as part of the analysis team allowed them to make remarkable leaps forward in terms of analysis, but no one was aware of her true hypothesis, which fueled her powerful, sinful ambitions. One can obtain the power of God. The secret hypothesis of Lee was the unseen side of the heroic epic, the true identity of the great darkness. The key was actually able to call forth and control the powers of creation and destruction. The common element of the heroic epic of the world hero was that they were able to repel the great darkness, but the reverse must hold true as well. Thus, the great darkness must also have been created by the key. As its name implied, it must not only have been able to lock the world prison closed, but also to open it. In truth, the heroic epic was actually the history of the conflict of those who fought over the key, between those who took on the mission from God and those who desired to revive the power of destruction for themselves. The ultimate meknite that brought about the end. The key analysis team renamed themselves to Crusadia, an organization that directly answered to the Confederation. Project Meknite, a machine soldier development project, was advocated as a measure to deal with the coming threat to the world. Several years later, the ultimate weapon, Meknite of the Morning Star, was created, using the key as its power core. However, something happened when they attempted to turn it on. The key caused the energy of the stars to immediately invert. It flowed back into the Earth's core, and this overflowing energy then shattered the crust, causing the power of destruction to leak out, and the Earth's surface was scorched black. All of this was planned by Lee. However, just as the Great Darkness was about to return, 7 Meknites built by Crusadia as secondary support machines appeared and destroyed Meknite of the Morning Star. Then they managed to seal the Great Darkness back in the Earth's crust. However, fragments of the divine power known as the Great Darkness remained on the surface in the form of relics known as legacies, each representing portions of its power, similar to the key. Even though the mastermind behind the disaster, Lee, was discovered to have died, her scheme had resulted in the damaged and ruined land around them being incapable of sustaining and supporting the human race. Crusadia came to the conclusion that the reason the world hero who could control the power of the key didn't appear in this era was the result of the Earth growing weaker, and thus they decided to focus on restoring the Earth's health and fostering life to spread about and diversify. To that end, they gave a command to the remaining Meknites, giving them orders to suppress human civilization, classifying it as their top priority. The personality data of the staff of Crusadia was linked via brainwaves to Meknites, and with that, the mission to restore the Earth began. Thus, Crusadia entrusted their hopes to the future, but there was something they failed to notice. While the body of Lee had died, she had transferred her soul into the world chalice, which now carried her will and ambitions. Page 8. The World Chalice Legend of the Rise and Fall of the World. Part 2. The Power of God and the Future of the World. Crusadia revived. Years had passed since the day of that tragedy. While Oram was wounded in the aftermath, Ningirsu knocked him unconscious and took with him the body of Ebe, as well as the sword she was impaled with. Although Oram was physically and mentally injured, he realized the danger of what Ningirsu planned to do, and decided to search for whatever remained alive on their distant star in order to stop Ningirsu from doing something truly irredeemable. To start, he discovered a crawler and restored its functions using the ability of the Meknites he now carried inside himself, and succeeded in melding minds with it. In doing so, he learned of information about several tribes from the records he was able to access from the mind meld. Oram traveled the lands of each tribe and since the day of that tragedy. Ningirsu was purely driven by a single wish. To him, there was no point in a world without Eve, and if he could see her smile one more time, it didn't matter what he would have to do. Thanks to the cores of the mechanites he recovered from the 6 slaughtered nightmares, he learned the truth of the world, and by using lost technology, he constructed a body to house the soul of Eve. Next, he decided to create a world fit for her. Driven by an unwavering sense of purpose, Ningirsu began to build the divine gate, Babel. The mechanical doll that Ningirsu ultimately made, based on countless experiments, achieved replenishment of cellular induction from the cores of Eve, as well as manifesting the abilities of one of the twin swords that he had taken. Using his mechanical doll, as well as the world lance, shield, and armor he had in his possession, Ningirsu reworked them to react with the World Legacy World Wand, forcing it to activate. The final World War was about to begin, in a battle between Oram and his allies versus Ningirsu. The Crusadia Alliance, led by Oram, managed to get help from each of the major tribes, and together obtained a greater power from the World Crown that had been kept secret by the Arborea Lhasa tribe. Not worthy of bearing the name Crusadia, they took the fight to Ningirsu. The Orchist laid in wait for the Crusadia. Oram approached the tower, sensing the evil that threatened the world, all the while shuddering in terror at the majesty of Babel, which reached into the very heavens themselves. But standing between him and Babel was an endless horde of mechanical weapons called the Orchist. They were byproducts of the experiments Ningirsu to make a suitable vessel for Ebe. With how many he conducted, he had created what could be called an army. The Crusadia Alliance found themselves in a corner, trying to fight off his strongest weapon, Orchestrion, and in the midst of his fierce battle, Oram sensed something that had the same power of his key emanating from deep within Babel. Page 10. The Power of the World Wand. The shining Babel continued to grow and grow. The real goal of Ningirsu was not to build Babel up to the heavens, but rather to drop the World Wand from orbit in order to destroy the Earth's core via kinetic bombardment. Then the World Ark that slept deep underground would awaken, whose authority over life and death would allow Ningirsu to revive the soul of Ebe. And following that, he planned to release the power of the Great Darkness sealed deep within the Earth's core and use it to transform the revived Ebe into this world's new goddess, the rebuilder of worlds. Oram rushed towards the mechanical doll responsible for initiating this plan, but found himself blocked by Ningirsu and his Orchist hordes, and was dragged into a fierce battle. Ultimately, the World Wand did drop, and the Earth screamed in agony. The World Wand smashed into the Earth in a massive kinetic bombardment. The resulting impact tore the planet asunder, and warriors of the Crusadia Alliance were caught in the aftershock. However, in order to protect his beloved friends, Imtuk unleashed his power once more, and created a giant barrier at the cost of his own life. After the impact settled, all that remained on the impact site was the Crusadia Alliance and the World Ark, which used its power and authority over death to assimilate the corpse of Imtuk, who had died beneath it, and remade him as Andrake. And to make matters worse, the aftershock of its power ran through the cracked and exposed core of the Earth and reached all the world legacies across the planet, which caused the dragons to awaken. The world legacies, which embodied the authority of God, having absorbed Imtuk, transformed in order to exert the power of the very same God that had once created them. They transformed into dragons. Page 11. Lee's soul managed to revive. Oh, god dang it. Ningirsu, carrying the body of Ebe, headed for the mechanical doll. With the power of the key transplanted into it, Ningirsu would be able to control the dragons. Finally, with all the powers integrated, the soul of Ebe was revived with the power that ruled over life and death. But the smile on the mechanical doll's face was not the one that he wanted. At the very moment he called the soul of Ebe back, Lee, who remained a part of her, took the initiative and seized control of the mechanical doll. Using the power of the key inside her, she erased the soul of Ebe. There was no heir of the key capable of reviving God among the Legacy's hope for life to take root once more was within the scope of her plans. When an heir who could activate the World Legacies finally appeared after countless ages, she schemed again, stopped at once by the heir, her goody two-shoes friends, and that meddling dragon. Her obsessions with that power grew greater and even more maddening. She absorbed the corpse of Ebe and 5 of the guard dragons, and having done so, Eatly obtained the authority they had, and finally had the power of God at her fingertips. Eatly called forth the power of God sealed inside the Earth's core, and used it to awaken the central nervous system, Deus Ex Crawler. She desired to reign as a complete and perfect God, incorporating the power of God into her very being. And with Mandark consumed by the power of death standing in the way, it seemed at that moment that all hope was lost. But then, Justitia suddenly flew in from the celestial forest and unleashed its power. It merged with the body of Ebe, which was pulled free from Eatly, and the two were reborn as Ebe, the World Chalice Justicar. Page 12. The Vessel with the Heart. Eatly, who had control over all the powers and authorities of God, had her power seized from her by Ebe, now dwelling inside of Justica. The soul of Ebe should have been erased during their fusion, but was actually the soul of the mechanical doll that Lee had erased. Although the mechanical doll was originally made to be a mere vessel, at some point it gained its own sense of identity, most likely because of the cellular induction process. Galatea was a name that the doll destined to become Ebe secretly gave herself, as no one else had bothered to give her one. Galatea was a name that belonged to a woman who was loved and became a flesh and blood human being, according to information she accessed from the records of the ancient civilization. When Lee and Ebe fused, Galatea sacrificed her own soul in place of Ebe. Meanwhile, the soul of Ebe was transferred to the World Chalice, which had later been remade into Guard Dragon Justica. The vessel of God's power appeared from the Earth's depths. Having lost the power of the key, Eatly went on a rampage, as she could no longer control the massive amount of power contained inside her body, so it rapidly collapsed onto itself. On the other hand, the revived Ebe joined forces with Oram and called forth the soul of Imtuk back from Mardark. Imtuk then evolved into Almarduk, amplified by the power of life itself. However, soon after their hopes were lifted, from the depths of the earth destroyed by X-Crawler feeding on power of the core, came the World Gears, the vessel of God's power. Standing before the World Gears, the embodiment of the Great Darkness, the other name for the power of destruction, Oram decided to try and fight back. Having once partially inherited the key from Mekhanite Blue Sky, and with all the power of the World Legacies assembled, Oram decided to strike the Great Darkness down. The spear of the mech deity created in response to the dying wish of Galatea. As Oram tried to unite the various powers together, Eatly sensed it and tried to make one final desperate attack. However, it was Ningirsu who stopped her. In response to the dying wish of Galatea, he used the remains of Babel and his former army of Orcists to forge Ningirsu, the Orcist of the Evening Star. Page 13. Birth of the World Hero of the Creation Myth. The attack from the Crusadia Alliance led by Oram, the unexpected rebirth of Ebe, and finally the counterattack of Ningirsu, the body of Eatly, which had lost all sense of higher thought and reason, was finally destroyed by the attack of Ningirsu. But her very existence continued to cling to the throne of God until the very end, despite losing all rationality or sanity. Now lost adrift in a sea of madness, Lee forced her soul to merge with the World Gears due to its synchronization with X-Crawler. However, her body, no longer in possession of the key, was now unable to restrain and control the incredible power the throne possessed, and as a result, the World Gears, reacting to the evil will of Eatly, went completely out of control. Responding to Eatly's evil thoughts, it began rampaging. Its existence, which harbored the power of God that could create and destroy worlds and even stars, started to bring about the destruction of the world faster as a result of its leaking power. The World Gears, which had become the avatar of destruction, had reached a level where it was no longer possible legendary being that had been whispered of throughout eternity, Mech Knight Crusadia Avramax. In other worlds, he had awoken as the world hero. Fusion with the vessel of God's power, Avramax charged straight into the heart of the world gears, where a remnant of the mind of Lee lingered. There he learned the truth about the God that created their world. The world gears of theological demiurgy is really the prototypical form of all gods, a vessel that does the will of God in response to the will of the being inside of it. In short, an apotheosis program. The entity that had previously occupied the world gears used it to control and then operate the movement of the heavens, but whoever they were, they disappeared in the process of sealing the out-of-control power of destruction deep within the planet. And now, once more a crisis had occurred due to its power. If it continued to rampage like this, it would not only destroy the world, but the heavens as well. Avramax, thinking that because he had become the awakened master of the key, he could control it, completely unleashed its power. Instead of trying to destroy God, he chose to try and become one with the vessel. Thus, Avida, rebuilder of worlds, was born. The world hero chose to become God and settle everything. Page 14. Rebirth of the world. Reverse rebirth. The newly born God, Avida, armed with the power of God surpassing all human understanding that he obtained after countless merciless battles, hoped he could restore the original world he used to live on as a human, along with Ningirsu, Ebe, his Crusadia allies, and all the other lives lost in the World War. It might have been a human and self-righteous thing for a god to do. Maybe it was more sensible to punish them by destroying the world, but ultimately he chose to absorb the crumbling world into the vessel and booted up a restoration program for the life forms born on that world. And then there was light. World Reassembly. Avida chose to start the World Restoration Program. On that day, in a dazzling light, she lost consciousness, and when she awoke, what she saw was a calm night sky laid out before her. With the twinkling light of stars gently illuminating the world around her, she embarked on a journey. Sometimes the sword she held would blink and glow with a faint light. What laid ahead on the path that guided her on, no one knew. Still, that girl entrusted her hopes to its blinking light, continuing to journey the world he left behind. Oram disappeared from the world as the rebuilder of worlds at the end of the World War, and with his name carved into history, leaving behind the key, now in the form of a sword. The battle for the power of God must never happen again. Ebe carried the sword, traveling the world restored by the person that mattered most to her. Ningirsu, who once walked down the wrong path, was revived as a knight who protects the world. Following the earnest wish of his friend Oram, he pledged to watch over and support Ebe in secret. With him was the fairy Galatea, snuggled close up beside him. Due to the effects of the restoration program executed by the rebuilder of worlds, the key was so entwined with the fate of the world, it was remade into a sword that absorbed the power of the world legacies. Ebe, the master of the sword known as the World Key, went on a journey to find a place to seal it forever and prevent the tragedy from ever happening again. Miraculously, the power of the rebuilder of worlds repaired the destruction caused by the great darkness. Countless stars twinkled in the sky, and the breath of life could be heard all around. And Ebe, who was given the World Key, pushed forward with determination in her heart to where the world legacy leads next. That was nice. I enjoyed that. Alright, let's beat this fucker up. So that's that. Thanks to my patrons for making this video possible, I guess. And I'll see you for whatever nonsense they dream up next month.